All right, everybody. Let's go ahead and get started, shall we? Welcome back to the Dharma Doors. I'm MC Owens. This is the San Francisco Dharma Collective. And tonight, we're going to continue looking at the Mahāsakuludāyi Sutta. This is Sutta number 77 in the Majjhima Nikāya. Um, this is going to be part 4 of our study of this. But if you weren't here the other nights, it's okay because we're kind of looking at this sort of at these different sections. And so we kind of have a whole theme tonight. Last week's theme was, I'd say jhana, kind of the deeper meditative states. And now, tonight, we're going to look at some meditative states beyond even the jhanas. So, and we'll probably finish this sutra, but really quickly, let me remind you. So, this is one of those suttas where the Buddha is talking to a wanderer named Udayan, or the noble one, the Sakuludāyi. And the question has arisen. There's a bunch of different religious teachers, wanderers, ascetics, different groups. They've all gathered in Rajagaha, in the capital. And there's a conversation about why students revere their different teachers. And what we hear in the very beginning is that there's only one teacher actually among all of the teachers that all of that student or all of that teacher's students revere the teacher. And even the people who have left studying under that teacher still revere that teacher. And that one teacher is Shakyamuni Gautama, the Buddha. And so there raises this question. Why? Why is Gautama or Gautama, Buddha, why is he so revered among all these different teachers? So that's sort of the main theme of the sutta is sort of why should we care what the Buddha says? Why revere the Buddha? Interestingly, the wanderer Udayan, he has some ideas about why the Buddha is so honored. And he says, oh, there's 5 reasons why everybody loves the Buddha. He doesn't eat very much. He wears whatever. He eats whatever is in his bowl. He sleeps wherever. And he loves seclusion. So that's Udayan's idea of why the Buddha is so noble, because he doesn't eat very much. The Buddha says, and then the Buddha responds in this very interesting way, saying, but a bunch of my students actually, they eat less than I do. They wear worse clothes than I do. They sleep in worse conditions than I do. They eat kind of less or even, whatever they're given, more than I eat whatever I'm given. And they're even more secluded than I am, the Buddha says. So why would they revere me if those are the qualities by which I am honored? So the Buddha says, yeah, it's not because I don't eat a lot and all of that. The Buddha says, no, there's 5 reasons, like 5 Buddha approved reasons why people revere me, he says. Number 1, because I have an aggregation of merit, right? So the Buddha has accumulated a lot of good merit. He's a moral, upright person. That's one reason to revere the Buddha. Number 2, he's knowledgeable. He knows what he's talking about. He's not theorizing about things he hasn't experienced. He's talking about what he has experienced, what he really knows. So he's knowledgeable. Number 3, he has an aggregation of prajna, an aggregation of wisdom. So he's also very smart in that way, able to kind of refute any debate or win any debate. The fourth reason the Buddha says that he's revered is because he teaches the Four Noble Truths. For people who have experienced suffering, he says, I tell them about the truth of suffering. I tell them about its accumulation. I tell people about its cessation, and I tell them the path that leads to its cessation. So those are the first four reasons the Buddha says why people revere him. And then there's the fifth reason. And this fifth reason has taken us a few weeks to get through because basically the Buddha is saying, oh, and people revere me because I teach all of this. This is my teaching. This is my doctrine. So it's one of the reasons why I think this is a really excellent sutta to study. It is a kind of complete overview of the entirety, in a way, of the early Buddhist path. So we're going to finish up, probably, hopefully, we're going to finish up the last part of the fifth reason why the Buddha is revered. But I want to kind of, there's one word that I haven't mentioned yet. And I was reviewing the sutra over this past week, and I kind of want to take a quick step back. So this would just be another helpful review for anybody out there who wasn't here maybe in the previous nights. So after the Buddha gives his first four reasons to be revered, he starts the fifth one by saying this. So if you happen to have the Wisdom Publication Edition, I'm just jumping back real quick to page 636. So after the Buddha talks about, well, I teach the Four Noble Truths, that's at the top of page 636. We move into the next section, which is the fifth reason the Buddha is revered. And the Buddha basically says, well, the first part of the fifth reason is because I teach the four foundations of mindfulness, the satipatthana. Now, there's one part of this, though, that I didn't discuss a few weeks ago. I didn't discuss it last week. And what it is I want us to kind of recognize that when you read this little section about the four foundations of mindfulness, it concludes by saying, the Buddha says, and thereby many disciples of mine abide, having reached the consummation and perfection of direct knowledge. That phrase, that through the four foundations of mindfulness, many disciples of mine have reached the consummation and perfection of direct knowledge. Well, what I want to kind of just focus on for a few minutes, I want us to recognize actually that the next section about the four right strivings, the Buddha says, yeah, and many of my disciples have used the four right strivings, or the four right efforts, as you might know them, and thereby many disciples of mine abide, having reached the consummation and perfection of direct knowledge. So this is, I didn't mention this last week, but each of these is a way to enlightenment. Let's just gloss that for a moment as enlightenment, right? So it's not that, and I know that I may have presented it this way. It's not that it's like the four foundations of mindfulness, and then when you're ready, you should do the four right efforts. And then when you're ready, you should do the next thing. And then when you're ready, you should do the next thing. And eventually you'll do the 10 kasinas. No. Each of these is a different technique to reach the perfection and consummation of kind of direct knowledge in that way, which I do want to talk about, but very quickly or not. Eric, question, comment, idea?
Eric, can you type your question in the
Oh,
chat?
yep. Real quick, just curious. Oh, where'd we go? Um, Eric, and I think that's Eric Mendoza.
I think so. Hold on one sec.
Mhm.
Sorry, my bad. I didn't have the chat allowed. Eric, can you type your question in the chat?
Mm. All right. All right. So let's talk. Well, that was the key term. That was exactly what I was going to do too. Was this big long phrase? Ah, so if you have a question about number two, about jnana or knowledge, go back to the other sessions because I can't get too stuck on that second quality of the Buddha. But basically, what if we kind of look at that section, it's this idea that when the Buddha says that he knows something, he really knows it. He's not sort of just talking out of some other orifice of his body in that sense. He knows what he's talking about in that way. Or and when he says that I see something, I truly see it. So that's the basis of the Buddha's knowledge. I kind of glossed it as that the Buddha, again, he knows what he's talking about. It's not theoretical. Whereas if we go back to just really quickly, if we go back to our four foundations of mindfulness, doing the four foundations of mindfulness practice can culminate in this consummation and perfection of direct knowledge. Excuse me. So that's a big, long, complicated Pali uh, term. And the basis of it is this abhinya ovasana paramipata. So there's a few different words going on in there, but the direct knowledge that's being referred to is the word abhinya. Now, the root of that word is nya, knowledge, just like jnana, pranya, vijñā, all of these words that the root of them is jnana, knowledge. But in Buddhism, there's different modes of knowledge acquisition. There is subject-object knowledge, which is vijñāna, or just called vijnana. There is associative knowledge, which is, oh, that looks like that. And that's called samnya. So, and that's one of the aggregates, samnya. The root of all of this is just jnana, knowledge, and that's the thing that the Buddha supposedly has. That's number two, just jnana. There's prajnana, or just prajna, which is like knowledge at the edges of knowledge, or kind of meta knowledge, that kind of super knowledge. And then there's abhinya, or abhinyana. And this is sort of, well, actually, abhinya is often sometimes translated as super knowledge versus like transcendent knowledge. What we basically need to know for tonight is that abhinya in a Pali sutta like this, abhinya is basically, again, enlightenment, that highest level of like arhat knowledge. Just like abhidharma, we encountered the term abhivinya or the abhivinaya. So exactly. So abhi is like that higher, much higher, either maybe higher dharma, higher discipline, or higher knowledge. Now, in the Mahayana Buddhist tradition, abhinya takes on an entirely kind of a life of its own. But for tonight, we're just, it's just direct knowledge, enlightened understanding. But what's interesting about this is another part of that big long word, which is the occurrence of a term named a padami. A padami, you might know it by its Sanskrit term, a paramita. So the paramita is this very particular Buddhist idea. And it's being translated here as, I guess it's the part of the perfection in terms of the consummation and perfection of abhinya, of direct knowledge. But this is one of, and Bhikkhu Bodhi or Bhikkhu Nyanamoli, their footnote mentions that this is one of the, kind of few occurrences of that term parami in the suttas. Now, this idea of a perfection is always a little misleading. It's misleading because of this very idea of perfect versus imperfect. A parami actually means like the other shore. And a parami, like as a noun, is something that brings you to that other shore. So this is the idea of like someone who's made it to the other shore. They're out of samsara. They're out of the life of suffering. They're in nirvana. They're on the other shore. They're an arahat in the early tradition. So that's what's being referred to here as the consummation and perfection of direct knowledge. And the thing, again, I wanted to cycle back to was that the four foundations all by themselves, that's all you need. But of course, if you know the four foundations, if you know the four foundations of mindfulness, then you would know, yeah, that is all you need, because the four foundations are meditating or concentrating or focusing attention on the body, but then to the sensations or the actual tones of those feelings you're having. Do you like them? Do you don't? So this is the sensations or Vedana, the second foundation. So you're focusing your attention on sensations, but then you're realizing that the very chitta, the very state of mind you're in right now, is the culmination of the way you're reacting to all the sensations of the body. And so then that would give you insight into the fourth foundation of mindfulness, which are dharmas, truths, like the Four Noble Truths or the five aggregates that make up the sentient subject. And in other words, if you actually attend to the fourth foundation of mindfulness, right there is liberation. And it's a process that begins with the body, sensations, mind states, and dharmas. That's the practice. Or the four right efforts. Cultivate good dharmas. If good dharmas are there, you tend to them. Don't cultivate bad dharmas. And if bad dharmas are arisen, don't try to tend to them. Let them just fade away. If you did that successfully and you got all of the good kushala dharmas up, and the garden of your mind was full of kushala dharmas, and there was no arising at all of akushala dharma, of unwholesome dharmas, that would be the consummation of the path. That would be it. You did it. Or, and that's where there are all the different techniques for cultivating this paramita or this abhinya in that way. So I just wanted to focus on that each section here, it concludes with that same statement about many disciples of mine have used this technique to access direct knowledge. That includes all of the ideas we discussed a few weeks ago, what were called the 37 aids to awakening, which are all of these different lists culminating in the Eightfold Path. But then we talked about the 8 liberations, the 8 transcendent bases of meditation, there's the word again, ayatanas, right? These like kind of higher, more subtle bases of meditative concentration. And then even the 10 discs, the 10 kasinas, those were also a technique for cultivating direct knowledge. And then last week, we spent a lot of time going through the jhanas section, which of course, doing the jhana practice is a way to get direct knowledge. Okay, that kind of leaves us right where we are, or right where we were left off last week. Anybody have any remaining questions from all of that? Questions about abhinya? Cool. So I wanted to do that very quickly because, like I said, I've been kind of re-looking or kind of revisiting this sutta over the past week, and I've kind of noticed something very interesting. And what it is so the first thing I noticed is that each of those is a way for developing abhinya or direct knowledge. And that's interesting because now let's look at the next one, the next way that the Buddha says many of my disciples acquire direct knowledge. Let's look at it. So, page 642 in this version, paragraph 29 down there at the bottom. The Buddha says to the wanderer Udayan, again, Udayan, I have proclaimed to my disciples the way to understand. Thus. So you should understand like this. This body of mine, made of rupa, made of material form, consisting of the 4 great elements, procreated by a mother and father, and built up out of boiled rice and porridge, this body of mine is subject to impermanence, to being worn and rubbed away, to dissolution, to disintegration. And this vijnana of mind and this consciousness of mine is supported by that body and bound up with it. So that's what the disciple thinks. Udayan. Suppose there were a beautiful beryl gem of purest water, 8-faceted, well-cut, clear, and limpid, possessed of all good qualities. And through that gem, there ran a blue, yellow, red, white, or brown thread strung through it. Then someone with good eyesight, taking that gem in their hand, might review it this way. This is a beautiful beryl gem of purest water, 8-faceted, well cut, clear and limpid, possessed of all good qualities, and through it is strung a blue, yellow, red, white, or brown thread. Udayan. So too, I have proclaimed to my disciples the way to understand thus. This body of mine, made of material form, consisting of the 4 great elements, procreated by a mother and father and built up out of boiled rice and porridge, it's subject to impermanence, to being worn and rubbed away, to dissolution and disintegration. And this consciousness of mine is supported by it and bound up with it. And thereby, many disciples of mine abide, having reached the consummation and perfection of direct knowledge. So that's another one. So that's sort of one main thing I wanted to focus on tonight. We were told in this sutta that the Four Noble Truths are a method by which many disciples of the Buddha reach direct knowledge. We were told that the Four Right Efforts is a method. We were told all of these different methods. And now we were just told another one. Anybody have any ideas? What's the message? I mean, I have theories as usual, but I just wanted us to notice that this is one all by itself. Any thoughts, Eric?
See if I can mute. Hi, Michael.
Hi, Eric. Thoughts on the barrel
Can you hear
jam?
me?
Yeah, yeah.
Well, you can, I don't know, maybe my connection is poor, but I think it's this idea that once that you have purified your vision enough, every Dharma is a door for liberation, right? Basically, in the Mahayana, it's pretty much like everywhere because it's the idea of the Dharma Dhatu.
Sure. Sure. But we're looking for like, what is this clear gem with a string through it? And that string might be red, yellow, white, blue, or brown.
Oh, because we're gonna go to the Manomayakaya.
Well, we're getting there and we need to, very good. Exactly.
That's the point, I think.
Okay.
It doesn't even make sense without them. Okay, hey, shut up.
Okay. But I hear you, Eric, and you're prescient as usual. Like that whatever is about to happen in this conversation is going to be relevant in the next part of this. But we can't or for this evening, I don't want this one to be attached to the one before it and the one after it. I want to respect that the Buddha said, no, no, no. Many of my disciples have used this contemplation to achieve direct knowledge. Now, if it, I'll tell you one thing. If it were only that it was a blue, yellow, red, or white thread and not a brown one, like, and I'm just saying because those four colors have popped up many times before. And there does seem to be maybe an allusion to the elements. A lot of people, we talked about this last week, that those four colors often are elemental colors. But the Buddha throws in this fifth brown one basically to say, I don't know, I read that as like any color at that point. So we have two elements. Yeah, Maria, you got it? You figured it out?
Shoot, I don't know. But is it Buddha nature?
Not in a Pali Sutta, not in the early days.
All right. Well,
Good.
that's best I got.
Yeah, yeah. Good thinking. Good thinking. So here's my, oh, Gnome, you got it. No, Gnome's got it.
Well, just why not? I'll throw something out. Um, just, I mean, it sounds a little like calling what you see, like seeing something clearly and naming it by what you see, naming it as you see it, or something.
Ye-
Not the naming, but the seeing it clearly.
Excellent. I would definitely say that the seeing clearly is key to the metaphor. For me, I can't help but find what would it be? Like, you know, whenever you're dealing with kind of similes like this or analogies, right? You're I'm always looking for the balance of, so you have the gem and the string over here. What what's it being compared to over here? Well, it's being compared to the body of form and consciousness. So for me, those are two different things going on in this side of the equation. The body of form, which is subject to impermanence, built up by rice and porridge, subject to decay, that's one part. And then it says this thing about medvijnana, and my consciousness is dependent upon that impermanent body. So for me, this section separates the vijnana from the body of form. Now it's a question of which is the string, which is the gem. My guess is, and anybody out there, if you have ideas, please let me know, because I'm just grasping at possibilities. I can't help but feel like the string is the consciousness and the clear gem is the body of form. And the ability to sort of see through the body of form to just see the consciousness. And we have to keep in mind that this is early Buddhism, where there was a sense of reincarnation. And in early Buddhism, it is the vijnana that goes next to the next life, so to speak. Remember, in Buddhism, there's no soul. There's no Atman. There's no Atta. There's no essential you that would be the thread running through the whole thing. But in Buddhism, there is consciousness changing every moment. But in the traditional Buddhist view, or especially the early Buddhist view, it is the fifth aggregate of vijnana that basically becomes disembodied at the moment of death and is basically like a radio wave riding the bardo. So the vijnana is no longer riding the radio wave of the brain mind, but is riding the bardo. And then that radio wave goes into a new body of form. So that's my interpretation of it, but I'm actually totally open to it being the other way around. That it's, yeah, Maria, you have thoughts about is it the string that's the body and the clear gem is the consciousness? Hmm. Ah,
Well, just that I was gonna reverse them, and I could see a way of reading it that the body of form is kind of the thread that you can kind of, I don't know, that continues through conditioned reality, just kind of always like a fountain. But I guess you could read that as the thread, and that there's some part of consciousness that is the gem. So that's kind of how I was reading it. But and we've talked about, the eighth and the ninth consciousness or something like that. So maybe that could be a read.
Indeed. So we could read it either way in that sense, but let's rewind a couple of steps. Let's not lose sight of let's not lose sight of the Dharma. And what I mean is like, well, what's the teaching here though? The teaching here is very much about seeing the impermanence of the body. Like seeing this body of form built up by porridge and rice and all of that, but seeing it as impermanent. And I want to kind of remind everybody that this is like an essential, Buddhist teaching, very much an essential early Buddhist teaching. And what it is, and I've been using this example a lot because it's just so kind of clear. Pardon that pun. But I've been using the example a lot of the time that I hit my fingernail and got that one of those black marks at the very bottom. But then over months, because it took months, I watched it grow out slowly. And then eventually, I clipped that part off. And I actually saw the impermanence of the body of form, which is that, oh, that's right. These are brand new fingernails. These are like a couple of months old. And I have probably been through how many sets of fingernails? And they just keep growing and getting clipped and growing and getting clipped. But am I going down the toilet drain with the fingernails every month? Am I the body of form? Notice that there's times when I do not identify with the body of form. There's times when I go, no, those are just the fingernails coming and going. But there's other times when I identify as the body. And what is happening to the body is happening to me. And then, if I am the body, then when things happen to the body, they're happening to me and I'm suffering as a result. So the teachings of the Buddha or Buddhism have always been about remembering you are not the body. The consciousness is dependent upon the body, according to this sutta. It is dependent upon the body. What's the other part of it? It's supported by it and bound up with it. So that's true that the consciousness is supported and bound up with the body, but the point is that you can experience that kind of as an observer and watching the fingernails grow and get clipped and go away. You can experience the body as an observer, or you can experience it as the body. And Buddhism is always suggesting in a way that clinging, that upadana, that choice is sort of up to you. How are you identifying? So again, that kind of separation of the consciousness or vijnana, observing the body of form, being supported by it and bound up with it, but not necessarily being exactly the same thing as it. That seems to be the meditation on this gem and the string in that way. So, are you ready to make a mind-made body? No.
I really appreciate that you have reviewed the whole of the sutra every time. Since this is the fourth time, something is sinking in. It was striking me that what's his name?
Udayan.
Udayan, what Udayan first said, oh yeah, everyone is most into you, Buddha, because all the things he named, I think all the things he named were kind of like bodily things, like you don't eat a lot, you don't sleep in comfortable places,
Yep.
So that seems like probably not a coincidence that's what he's, and then the Buddha is countering with all this stuff.
Yep. Great insight, Noam. The more we go through this sutta, the more layers I see to it. I went off on that first night about the food aspect of it, I do agree with you that there's a whole body thing going on with this sutta as well. And that's exactly where we're about to go next. All right. So again, let's remember that that whole contemplation of the impermanence of the body, that's a technique for acquiring direct knowledge. Again, Udayan, there's another one. So I have proclaimed to my disciples the way to create from this body another body having rupa, having form, mind made, with all of its limbs, lacking no faculty. It's just as though someone were to pull out a reed from its sheath and think this way. This is the sheath. This is the reed. The sheath is one thing. The reed is another thing. It's from the sheath that the reed has been pulled out. Or just as though someone were to pull out a sword from its scabbard, and they would think thus, this is the sword, this is the scabbard. The sword is one, the scabbard is another. It is from the scabbard that the sword has been pulled out. Or just as though someone were to pull out a snake or pull a snake out of its slough and think thus, this is the snake, this is the slough. The snake is one, the slough is another. It's from the slough that the snake has been pulled out. So too, Udayan, I have proclaimed to my disciples the way to create from this body another body, having form, mind made, with all of its limbs lacking no faculty. And thereby, many disciples of mine have reached the consummation and perfection of direct knowledge. So, first up, although this does seem to it is being presented as this is another technique, if we go back to the other suttas, if we go back to like the Visuddhimagga that I mentioned last week or whenever, you don't get to create a mind-made body until you have well-developed jhana. So in this case, it would seem like there's some preparatory work to be done. But I think what the Buddha is saying, though, is that many disciples of mine have reached the point where they've created mind-made bodies, and that was their ticket to direct knowledge. Not to say that you could just go create a mind-made body tonight, necessarily. But let's explore what exactly it is they're talking about. So, this is a pretty classic part of Buddhism, by the way. This is not obscure. We hear about this often. I agree with Eric. Eric kind of mentioned before about how the gem and the thread running through it is sort of setting us up for this. And I agree with him that kind of thematically, the kind of separating of the consciousness from the body of form is sort of getting us ready for this next thing. So let me just walk you through the language here. And again, we can kind of talk about and explore what we think this maybe means. So the Buddha gives a series of different examples, right? The reed in the sheath, the sword in the scabbard, and the snake in the slough, right? And he makes it really clear. There's two things going on here. Whoop! And so the creation of a mind-made body is out of one body, whoop! There's the creation of another body. But this is a mano maya kaya, a mind-made body. So the mano is the mind, the manas, the mano, maya, which means illusory, and then a kaya, a body. Now, the Buddha says here that this manomaya kaya, that this body has form. It's mind made. It's maya, or manomaya kaya in that way. It's mind made, but it has all its limbs. And it lacks no faculty, meaning that this mind-made body can see, can hear, can smell, can taste, can touch, can think. And again, it's like a snake pulling out of its old skin, the slough. One of the main things that we kind of need to keep in mind, if we want to really kind of like, or again, I know I don't need to see this every time, but this is just my understanding of it, how I have come to understand the mind-made body. We really need to appreciate the language that keeps being used regarding a body of form, the rupa kaya. And what I mean is that we need to remember, and I probably didn't mention it, too recently, but we need to remember this threefold reality that Buddhism talks about. The realm of desire, where we spend sort of most of our waking time. The realm of form, which is the realm of jhana, the realm of meditation, the realm of Brahma. And then the formless realm, deep, deep meditative states where there is nothing to see, hear, smell, because it's formless. So we need to remember that there's this realm of like desire, but we gotta like remember, what does that mean in terms of the realm of desire versus the realm of form? One aspect of this is we need to remember that, for example, Michael, like the name, that's realm of desire. What I mean is that this cheek, this ear, in the realm of form, it's not Michael's ear. It's a piece of flesh that is more dense than the air around it. But in the realm of form, it's just the actual material. Versus the realm of desire is where you are. And when I say you, I mean like your identity and what you want out of life and your emotions and all of that's realm of desire stuff. Remember the the 8 liberations? If you go back, one of the first liberation was body of form, world of form. Form meets form. And the realization is like, oh, there's just matter. There's just atoms, 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 atoms. That's the realm of form. And again, there's no Michael there. I'm emphasizing this because when we first hear about like making a mind-made body, we might be thinking about it a little too realm of desire-y, as if like there's going to be 2 Michaels. No, 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 no. Michael's down in the realm of desire. Remember that. Now, what I'm getting at, or what I'm kind of ooching us towards, is understanding that in the world of Buddhism, they already talk about it kind of being a form of rebirth to move out of the realm of desire and to move into a kind of equanimous, realm of form meditation. They actually talk about transcending your body of desire and kind of moving into or being reborn into a body of form. For me, it's easier to understand what they're talking about in terms of, oh, okay, and now in that realm of form, you can mentally create another body of form, complete with all of its limbs, all of its faculties. And it doesn't happen in this sutta, but in other suttas, they talk about moving your vijnana out of the old consciousness, or sorry, out of the old body and moving it into this new fancy mind-made body of form. And that, this new fancy mind-made body of form, this is going to be very important for understanding the next section, which is going to be about where we go flying up to stroke the sun and the moon. How could we possibly fly all the way up to stroke the sun and the moon? You're never going to do that with the body of the realm of desire. Put it to you that way. So I wanted to kind of emphasize that this is not a new you body. It is a mind-made body of form in the form realm. So I would even dare risk using this new age term like an astral body. I would be willing to go there right now. Only in terms of like a comparison or an analogy of like a lot of meditators talk about a kind of astral body versus the like lived breathing body. I suspect that this is something similar to that, if not exactly the same thing in that way. But that's me. Questions about the Manomaya Kaya, the three analogies? Yeah, Noe. Thoughts about this?
It's quite remarkable. I recommend reading The Circular Ruin, a short story by Jorge Luis Borges.
I
Where
love
a man, and the main line in the dreamer dreams the dream awake. That's one famous line from a short story recommended. Jorge Luis Borges, The Circular Ruin. It's all of like 8 pages, 10 pages.
duly noted. All right. So now that we've contemplated the gem with the thread through it, and now that we've kind of contemplated this idea of creating a mind-made body of form, let's go on to the next section. These are, of course, the various kinds of supernatural powers. So, again, Udayan. I have proclaimed to my disciples the way to wield the various kinds of riddhi or iddhis or siddhis in Sanskrit, the various kinds of supernatural powers. What are those? Well, having been one, they become many. Having been many, they become one. They appear and disappear. They go unhindered through walls, through enclosures, through mountains, as though they were going through space. They dive in and out of the earth as though it were water. They walk on the water as if it were the land. Seated cross-legged, they travel in the air or in space like birds. With their hands, they touch and stroke the moon and the sun, so powerful and mighty. They wield bodily mastery even as far as the Brahma world. Just as a skilled potter or their apprentice might create and fashion out of well-prepared clay any shape of pot that they wished. Or just as a skilled ivory worker or their apprentice might create and fashion out of well-prepared ivory any ivory work that they wished. Or just as a skilled goldsmith or their apprentice might create and fashion out of well-prepared gold any gold work of art they wished. So too, I have proclaimed to my disciples the way to wield the various kinds of supernatural powers. They wield bodily mastery even as far as the Brahma world. And thereby, Udayan, many disciples of mine abide, having reached the consummation and perfection of direct knowledge. So, that is a classic stock paragraph of the so-called superpowers. So the specific language of being one, they become many, being many, they become one, diving in and out of the earth as if it were water, walking on water as if it were land, stroking the sun and the moon. All of that is a stock paragraph used in all these different suttas to describe the supernatural powers. Now, again, I would refer to what I was saying before about the mind-made body. If you were to ask me, and this is just my opinion, I do believe that it is that manomaya kaya, the mind-made body, that goes in and out of the earth as if it were water and walks on water as if it were land. So that's my theory about that. I've noticed that these things are always written together like that, where you kind of have to be able to develop a mind-made body. Then you get to do all this superpower stuff. But any questions about the superpowers? We've talked about them before in Dharma Doors. I know they're of interest to some. You know, I will say this about it though. I would when you're thinking about this stuff, I would probably really strongly recommend a good, healthy Buddhist attitude towards it. And what I mean by that is, you might think like that these superpowers that we just mentioned, that they're either like true or not true. And I would suggest a kind of way of understanding that they are talking about something that is true. And it might just be that the best way to describe that is in terms of sinking into the earth as if it were water and walking on water as if it were land. Again, I would basically suggest not like coming down too tightly on, for example, oh no, Buddhas can walk on water. Like, no, literally. That Jesus was a Buddha. That's why he walked on water. I would avoid taking that like, no, it's true. I would avoid taking the it's it's just fiction. I would be open to somewhere in that middle path. So, all right. Shall we keep going? Yeah, Noe.
What comes to mind, Michael, is the idea of imagination, dreaming.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
And it's exactly my point, Noe. So, I often mention this, or I often kind of use this as an example. I haven't used this as an example here for a while. And I know what you think, but it's not going to be that. So if I could, well, I know that we think it would be like magical if I could like get this cup to float through the air. I don't really know why, just because my hand is attached to it, you're less impressed by that. Right? It's doing the same thing. So like Noe was saying, maybe our imagination isn't big enough to appreciate the floating cup in that way. So, excellent comment, Noe. Yeah. All right. Well, we're right on the heels of this. So let's keep going. So those that were just listed, the being many, becoming one, and all of that, those are the actual like idibala, the superpowers. All right. But now there's a couple of like super powers. And the first of it is called the divine ear. So again, Udayan. I've proclaimed to my disciples the way whereby the divine or heavenly ear element, so how to develop it, which is purified and surpasses the human ear. Such a person as this, they hear both kinds of sounds, heavenly or divine and human. They hear those noises that are far away as well as those that are near. Just as a vigorous trumpeter might make themselves heard without difficulty all throughout the four directions, so too, I have proclaimed to my disciples the way whereby the divine or heavenly ear element is developed, hearing everything divine and human, far as well as near. And thereby many disciples of mine abide, having reached the consummation and perfection of direct knowledge. So this is the Devya Shrutam, or the divine ear, something like that. Basically, this is, I think in English, we would probably call this clairaudience. There's such a term as clairvoyance, which means to see clearly, clairvoix. And then there's clairaudience, clearly seeing or hearing, which is kind of like when people can hear the dead, hear ghosts, maybe spirits, things like that. This is the Buddhist version of that. One of the main things, though, is being able to hear vast distances away and basically being able to focus your hearing attention on things very far away and being able to increase their volume. It doesn't say it here, but there's another part of the divine ear, which is actually being able, like if there was a really loud noise, whoop, you can just lower the volume. So it's a power over hearing. That's the divine ear. Again, it is a method or a technique to the development of direct knowledge. Next up, and by the way, these are always in this order. You always get the idibada or idibala, the superpowers, divine ear, and then understanding the minds of others, otherwise known as telepathy. But let's look at this real quick. Again, Udayan, I have proclaimed to my disciples the way to understand the minds of other beings, of other people, having encompassed them with their own minds. Such a person understands a mind affected by raga, attraction, or craving or lust. So they understand a mind affected by raga as being affected by raga. And they understand a mind unaffected by lust or raga as being unaffected by lust or raga. They understand a mind affected by divesha, by aversion or anger or hatred, as a mind affected by hatred. And they understand a mind unaffected by hatred as being unaffected by hatred. They understand a mind affected by delusion as affected by delusion, and a mind unaffected by delusion as unaffected by delusion. They understand a collected mind Not, I wouldn't translate it as contracted anymore. I did my homework, but hold off on that. They understand a collected mind as a collected mind, and they understand a scattered mind or a distracted mind as a distracted mind. They understand an exalted or expanded mind as an exalted or expanded mind, and an unexalted, unexpanded mind as unexalted or unexpanded. They understand an uttara, a surpassed mind as surpassed, and an unsurpassed mind as unsurpassed, anuttara. They understand a samhita, a concentrated mind, as a concentrated mind, and an unconcentrated mind as an unconcentrated mind. They understand a liberated mind as liberated and an unliberated mind as unliberated. Just as a man or a woman, young, youthful, and fond of ornaments, on viewing the image of his or her own face in a clear, bright mirror, or in a bowl of clear water, such a person would know if there were a spot thus. There's a spot. Or they would know if there is no spot thus. There's no spot. So too, I have proclaimed to my disciples the way to understand the minds of others, understanding all of those different kinds of states of mind. And thereby, many disciples of mine abide, having reached the consummation and perfection of direct knowledge. So, I often refer to this section for anybody that wants to understand this Buddhist idea of understanding the minds of others. It's very simple. There's a program, and it's called greed, anger, and delusion. And that program is operating all sentient beings' minds. And so because there is the same program, now, what you want is different from what a cat wants, is different from what I want. What you're averse to is different from what a cat is averse to, different from what I'm averse to. What you're delusional about is different than what a cat is delusional about, different what I'm delusional about. But our mind states are all being run by that same program. You can understand the minds of all beings if you understand the default mode program. That program of the three poisons of the kleshas, greed, anger, and delusion, how one relates to the three poisons determines whether they have what is called a collected mind or a scattered mind. So a collected mind is actually a good thing. You want to be calm, cool, and collected. We say that in English. You don't want to have a scatterbrain that's like, ooh, what's that? Ooh, what's that? Ooh, what's that? So scatterbrained, collected mind, but it's how you're relating to those three poisons in that way. Similarly, an expanded mind or an unexpanded mind. You know how sometimes when a good meditation, you start to feel like your mind's like kind of out here, maybe even like out here. You know how when you're really nervous or anxious, it sometimes feels like you're trapped inside there? So those are not expanded versus expanded. So one who can understand the minds of others can see like, wow, ooh, you're an expanded mind, very collected, not a lot of greed, anger, and delusion. And can also know whether that mind is surpassed or unsurpassed. Is there still room to go? Or, wow, this person is in the pocket of enlightenment, right? So they're surpassed or unsurpassed, concentrated, which is basically, we're talking about samadhi, samahita, this kind of equilibrium, concentration or not, and then liberated or not, liberated from the three poisons or not. And then that little example of the end, talking about a young man or a young woman who can look in a mirror and can see right away their own face and can see right away, ooh, I got a pimple. Or, ooh, clear. Just as clearly as somebody can see their own face in a mirror, this type of a person can see and know the minds of others just as clearly, we are told. So, that's understanding the minds of others. Stop me at any point, but we're going to move right along to now remembrance of past lives. Again, this is always part of this little family of superpowers. So again, Udayin, I've proclaimed to my disciples the way to recollect their manifold past lives. That is, 1 birth, 2 births, 3 births, 4 births, 5 births, 10 births, 20 births, 30 births, 40 births, 50 births, 100 births, 1,000 births, 100,000 births. Many kalpas of world contraction, many kalpas of world expansion, many kalpas of world contraction and world expansion. Knowing there I was named such and such, of such and such a clan, with such and such an appearance. Such was my nutriment, such my experience of pleasure and pain. Such was my span of life. And passing away from there, I reappeared elsewhere. And there too, I was named so-and-so of such and such a clan and so and so on. Passing away from there, I reappeared here. Thus, with all of their aspects and particulars, one recollects their manifold past lives. Just as a man might go from his own village to another village and then back again to his own village. And he might think, I went from my own village to that village, and there I stood in such a way, sat in such a way, spoke in such a way, kept silent in such a way. And then from that village, I went to that other village, and there I stood in such a way, and I kept silent in such a way. And then from that village, I came back to my own village. So too, I have proclaimed to my disciples the way to recollect their manifold past lives. Thus, with all their aspects and particulars, they recollect their manifold past lives. And thereby, many disciples of mine abide, having reached it, the consummation and perfection of direct knowledge. We've talked about that before. Again, very standard. Next up is the heavenly or divine I. Again, Udayin, I've proclaimed to my disciples the way whereby, with the divine I, which is purified and surpasses the human I, they see beings passing away and reappearing. Rich and poor, inferior, superior, fair and ugly, fortunate, unfortunate, all different types of people. They understand how beings pass on according to their karmic actions this way. These worthy beings, who were ill conducted in body, speech, and mind, revilers of the noble ones, wrong in their views, giving effect to wrong views in their actions, upon the dissolution of the body after death, they've reappeared in a state of deprivation, in a bad destination, in perdition, even in hell. Oh, but these other worthy beings who were well conducted in body, speech, and mind, not revilers of the noble ones, right in their views, giving effect to right views in their actions, upon the dissolution of their body after death, they've reappeared in a good destination, even in a heavenly world. Thus, with the divine eye, which is purified and surpasses the human, they see beings passing away and reappearing, inferior and superior, fair or ugly, fortunate and unfortunate. And this person, such a practitioner, they understand how beings pass on according to their karmic actions, just as though there were two houses with doors, and someone with good sight standing there between them saw people entering the houses and coming out and passing to and fro. So too, I have proclaimed to my disciples the way whereby, with the divine eye, one sees the passing away and reappearing of beings. They understand how beings pass on according to their karmic actions. And thereby, many disciples of mine abide, having reached the consummation and perfection of direct knowledge. And then finally, where these always lead, this always leads to the same place: knowledge of the destruction of the taints. So we've talked about the taints, we've talked about the defilements, all of that. So again, Udayan, I've proclaimed to my disciples the way whereby, realizing for themselves with direct knowledge, they here and now enter upon and abide in the deliverance of mind and deliverance by wisdom that are taintless with the destruction of the taints. Just as if there were a lake in a mountain recess, clear, limpid, and undisturbed, so that someone with good sight standing on the bank could see shells, gravel, and pebbles, and also shoals of fish swimming about and resting. And that person, they might think, there is this lake here. It's clear, limpid, and undisturbed. And there are these shells, gravel, and pebbles, and also these shoals of fish swimming about and resting. So too, Udayan, I've proclaimed to my disciples the way whereby, by realizing for themselves with direct knowledge, they here and now enter upon and abide in the deliverance of mind and deliverance by wisdom, which are taintless with the destruction of the taints. And thereby many disciples of mine abide, having reached the consummation and perfection of direct knowledge. All of that, Udayan, is the fifth quality, because of which my disciples honor, respect, revere, and venerate me, and live in dependence upon me, honoring and respecting me. These, Udayan, are the five qualities because of which my disciples honor, respect, revere, and venerate me, and live in dependence upon me, honoring and respecting me. This is what the Blessed One said. The wanderer Udayan was satisfied and delighted in the Blessed One's words. All right, so we made it all the way through. By the way, I want to remind everybody that knowledge of the destruction of the taints, which, remember, that means you're an arhat. If you've destroyed the taints, which are, sensual desire, craving for being, ignorance, the big, big problems. If you've destroyed those taints, then you're an arhat. And what I want to remind you is that actually in the context of the sutra here, I want to remind you that knowledge of the destruction of the taints is a superpower. It's right up there with the divine ear, the divine eye, knowing past lives. Well, yeah, all of that's like fancy, like, wow, like you know all your past lives, but do you know the destruction of the taints? That's a superpower. So I like to highlight that, to look at it that way, that would be a superpower. To basically overcome craving, it's a superpower. All right, so we did it. We finished the Mahāudayi Sutta. Final questions, comments, answers, ideas? Again, it's like the whole path. Yeah, Noe.
The whole path. The whole path to the here and now.
Mhm.
The whole it's not it's Stormy Mountain asking the Buddha about Manjushri, and when will Manjushri attain? And he says, ask Manjushri. Manjushri says, never, there's nothing to attain. But it's where you're at. It's when I'm here and now I'm here and now, to use words.
Mhm.
I love it. It's not somewhere out there. It's not somewhere out there. It's not somewhere. It's here and now. And he always comes back to that. And I'm so grateful to have that teaching. And thank you for your teaching.
Thanks, Noe. Yeah, Noe, it's why I wanted to remind everybody that just the 4 foundations of mindfulness, that's it. That's all you need. And in other words, I know this is one of those suttas where it's like a lot of lists, lot of lists. And I know that can seem a little like maybe daunting, where it's like, wow, I got to know all these lists to get enlightened. And it's like, actually, you really could get away with just really understanding one of these lists, because they're all very much interconnected in that way. So, so I wanted to do that to bring it back to a kind of simplicity, Noe, in that way, because I know that this sutta can make Buddhism seem not simple, but it is underneath in that way. So underneath the mind-made bodies and all that, it's pretty simple. So. All right. Then that's going to do it for tonight's Dharma Doors.